I recently signed up to teach a class on how to look at a Holbein painting and then be able to draft that pattern from the embroidery pattern in the painting and then apply that to costuming. But before we get started, my name is Lynn Fairchild and welcome to my channel. First, a quick little history lesson. Hans Holbein the Younger was an artist from the 16th century. His father and his older brother were also artists at this time. And Hans Holbein the Younger, long story short, he ended up in England, went back home, and then went back to England again. That second time he was in England was in the mid-1530s, and he became the court artist for Henry VIII. That's King Henry VIII, the one that's famous for having 6 wives. And while he was there, we believe that historians believe that Hans Holbein had painted at least 150 portraits while he was there in King Henry VIII's court. We don't have all of these portraits, but some of them have been lost to time, either from fire or war. With this Blackwork embroidery, which is known as Holbein stitch or double running stitch, it's known as Holbein stitch, I think, just because Hans Holbein the Younger, I know of at least 25 different either paintings or at least sketches that he did that had this embroidery in it, and his detail work is so phenomenal that I can look at it, well, you can look at it too. Anyone can look at it and be able to look at what the embroidery pattern was and be able to recreate it. Other artists at this time did paint this embroidery, but not as much, where like one artist may have painted one, another artist may have painted 2 portraits within it. And he did at least 25 that I've been able to find so far that have this embroidery in it. And so that's also why it's known as Holbein stitch. If you study King Henry VIII and the 6 wives during Catherine of Aragon, his first wife during her reign, it was also known as Spanish stitch. It was only after he then divorced Catherine of Aragon and then married Anne Boleyn that then the court decided to change it from Spanish stitch and then started to refer to it as blackwork. But when you look at a lot of Holbein's paintings, you are able to look at the painting, see what the embroidery pattern was, and then draft it and then recreate it. Personally, I like to use Excel, doing an Excel spreadsheet and then creating the pattern from that, and that's what I'm going to show you today. However, for the class I'm going to be teaching, I'm probably just going to have graph paper available since I don't know how many people will be in the classroom and it might be difficult for all of us to gather around the computer. But I'm going to show you an example of when you look at the pattern, you can then draft the pattern yourself to know exactly where all the stitches go. And then once you have that pattern, how to apply it to your own costuming. And my example is I have this partlet. This is a partlet that I had made years ago. And if you look right here, this right here is found in Hans Holbein's painting of, I believe it's called A Noble Boy with a Marmoset. Some historians believe that this portrait is of Edward VI, others, and that's the legitimate son of King Henry VIII, while other historians believe it may have been Henry Fitzroy, the illegitimate son of Henry VIII. Either way, the portrait was painted by Hans Holbein the Younger, and you can zoom in and see that ocean wave pattern, and then you can recreate this pattern. So to help me prepare for my class that I signed up to teach, I wanted to show you also how to look at a portrait and then be able to recreate that pattern from a Hans Holbein painting. And then you can then take that pattern. A lot of his portraits have the blackwork embroidery either on the collar or on the cuffs. But then you can then take that pattern and then be able to embroider your own costuming as well. The only thing I would recommend is to do the embroidery first and then attach it to your costuming. To me, especially depending on if you are going to be either gathering it or pleating it. I like to pleat, but that's personal preference. But I find it's a lot easier when it's flat and firm on a frame to then do the embroidery and then cut it out and then either hem it or whatever you're going to do to then attach it to your cuffs or to your collar. So that's my personal preference, but here we go. So to get set up, I first like to have the portrait on the left side. This is Hans Holbein the Younger's portrait of the noble boy with a marmoset, and you can see the Blackwork embroidery right along here on the collar. And then on the right, I like to have an Excel spreadsheet. And for the Excel spreadsheet, if I pull it out here, underneath the font on the left-hand side, you will see this drop-down box to draw a border, and I like to go down to draw border. And then from here, that's where you'll see a little pencil show up, and then I can start creating what I want. So if I want to, you just have to hold down the left key on the mouse, and then you can start. For the diagonals, you have to hold down the mouse to start the diagonal, go down to the other corner, and then release. If you're doing a straight line, you can do it by holding down the mouse and then going out as far as you want, and then lift up, and then you have a solid line. But for diagonal lines, you have to do each individual diagonal line. But once I have my Excel spreadsheet set up, and then I've got the portrait here, if I zoom in here, you can see the embroidery pattern here, and that is what I am going to be recreating over here. Another portrait of Hans Holbein the Younger. This is Lady Jane Seymour. She was the third wife of Henry VIII. And if you look right along here where her cuffs are at, she has blackwork embroidery, and I'm going to zoom in. This is a very intricate pattern, so I'm not going to do all of it, but I am zooming in just to show you where it's at. And this picture I have is kind of grainy. If you go onto the museum website, you can see the picture much more clearly when you zoom in and then be able to recreate the pattern. And this is what the pattern looks like after it's been recreated on an Excel spreadsheet. If you notice the ocean wave, it's slightly different, but it's very similar to the ocean wave that is found on the boy with the marmoset. The main difference, I think, are these little tails that you see on the diagonal line. This is a painting that was done by Hans Holbein the Younger right about 1526. It's the Darmstadt Madonna, and it's particularly this lady here. Her name is Anna, and I like to zoom in on her because if you look over here, she has embroidery all along her dress and on bands down the sleeves and also on the cuffs. And it's when you zoom in even more, you can recreate the patterns. And this is a zoomed in picture, and so for here with the blue circle, that's this pattern here that I've recreated on an Excel spreadsheet. The green circle here goes with this green pattern here, and then for the armband that's here, this is this pattern here. And again, with this, you can just pull up your Excel spreadsheet and then be able to just study the painting and then see where the embroidery patterns are. Some of them are easier to figure out than others, like right here, trying to figure out if this is more just a slightly diagonal line. It was a little more difficult, but as you see here, it is kind of a diagonal line, but some of the lines, like right here, you actually have two lines going down, whereas everything else in black, if it's in black, it is a single stitch over, but there are a couple spots that are in red, and those are where it's two stitches over. And he did a sketch of the whole family, but then he also did individual sketches of the family, and it's Anne. She's the one that I've circled back here. But if you look right along her dress, you can see where he has put where it looks like there is embroidery there. We don't have the original painting. We have a copy of the painting that still exists, but the embroidery was not by Hans Holbein because that's a portrait done by a different artist, so I didn't look at that particular embroidery because for this class I'm specifically focused on anything by Holbein, but if anything, I just found it interesting that she did have embroidery on her dress. Another example of embroidery on the collar, this is a double portrait of Sir Thomas and his son John. And if you look right here on the son's collar, you can see black, and I've zoomed in here, and then on an Excel spreadsheet I was able to recreate how I think the pattern was embroidered. This here is a portrait of Robert Cheeseman from about 1533, and if you look closely right here on his collar, you can just barely make out the black from the Blackwork Embroidery, and so I've zoomed in here on his collar to then recreate the pattern, and this is what I did on an Excel spreadsheet to recreate the pattern how I think the pattern looks. As you can tell, it is very small, so I would only count about with me I like to do about every third hole on my linen fabric, but that is personal preference. This is a miniature portrait of Mrs. Jane Small, formerly known as Mrs. Pemberton, and this is from 1536, and down here I've written that it's only 5.2 centimeters in diameter. That just means that this right here, the diameter from the left to the right, is only 5.2 centimeters. That tells you how small this portrait is, but Hans Holbein was still able to get the detail work so intricate that he was able to put the pattern here on the collar as well as on the cuffs, and I've zoomed in here on the collar and the cuffs, and then the pattern has been recreated here. This is the collar, and this is the pattern on the cuffs. This is a very simplistic pattern, but it's still a Blackwork embroidery pattern or a Holbein stitch pattern. This is Elizabeth, Lady Audley, from about 1538. This is also a miniature that is about 5.5 centimeters in diameter, and right along here on the kirtle, it looks like she has Blackwork embroidery, and if you zoom in, you can see what the pattern looked like, and then this is how I recreated that pattern onto an Excel spreadsheet. So to show you how to do this, here is the pattern, and what I would do, you can see that there is a line here. So I would start off with a line, and some of this is just playing around with the pattern until you figure out how the pattern fits onto the grid, onto the Excel spreadsheet. And here I can see these lines overlap this diagonal line, and it looks like that's how most of these are. But if I look closely, these all overlap going one diagonal way, but then this one over here is going diagonally the other way. I don't know if that is how the embroidery pattern was, or if that was just something how Hans Holbein painted it. But from here, I'm going to go from here, and then I'm going to go up on a diagonal. If you are interested in learning more about Hans Holbein the Younger and taking a more critical look at different portraits or sketches of his that have Blackwork embroidery in it, remember Blackwork is also Holbein stitch, it's a double running stitch, also Spanish stitch. But if you are interested in this, then please keep an eye out for an upcoming video, because I have signed up to also teach a class on taking a critical look, and I believe I'm up to about 25 portraits or sketches of his that have Blackwork embroidery in it. So I'm super excited about that class, so keep an eye out for that video. Thank you for checking out my YouTube channel. If you enjoyed this video and would like to watch more of my videos, please follow the links on the side of the page. Remember to select thumbs up that you like the video. It helps with the algorithm. If you have any questions or comments, please post them below, and please click subscribe and ring that bell to be updated when new videos come out.